Hi everyone, my name is Karis and welcome back to my corner of the internet where I talk about books and other things that I enjoy. Today is episode 2 of my anticipated read series, which is basically a series where I talk about the books that I've added to my Storygraph TBR recently, talk a little bit about them, and if relevant, talk about the booktuber or person that I heard about the book from. The first time I did this video I talked about the 10 things that I most recently added to my TBR on Storygraph, and this time I've got another 10 to talk about. The videos have worked out about a month apart, so I think that's pretty good. So I think in this series I'm going to try and talk about 10 in every video, and then hopefully there'll be one a month-ish, just depending on the rate that I add things to my Storygraph TBR. Every single book on today's list I've actually found out about myself, either by things just popping up on social media or by going out and looking through lists. I did actually look through a big list of anticipated 2021 literary fiction titles and add some of those to my TBR in the past month, so that's what some of these are going to be. Although I would say that while they may be considered literary fiction, there's also a lot of other elements to them, like some of them are thrillery, some of them are a bit crimey. You'll see what I mean when I get into it. As with last time, I'm going to go in order from the one that I added the longest ago to the most recent one. So the one that I added the longest ago is called The Panic Years by Nell Frizzell, and it's specifically dealing with the period of time that the author coins the panic years, a period of time in your life between around the ages of 25 to 40, where, as the description of the book says, every decision that a woman has to make has an added layer of urgency to it. So I believe it's going to be a feminist look at topics such as career progression, marriage, moving in with partners or moving out to live by yourself, and ultimately the idea of motherhood. I'm going to be 25 this year, and some of these topics are definitely things that I think about. For example, the idea of having a child. The older I get, the more, I guess, stressful the idea becomes, because you start to realise this urgency, I guess, as the blurb of this book says, to sort of start putting those steps into motion, because you're always aware that you don't have an unlimited amount of time. So it's something that I've always thought, yeah, I want to do that, but I can honestly sit here as a 24, almost 25-year-old and it still seems like something very, very far away. It doesn't seem any closer to me now as what it did when I was thinking about it when I was 14 going on 15. So the concept of the book definitely really interests me. I'm interested to read from someone else's point of view and see how they think about these things that are going around in my head. The one hope that I do have for this book is that it is intersectional and it's not just talking about the experiences of cisgendered women, it also talks about trans women as well as women from all different backgrounds and cultures. The next book that I've added is called Lemon by Kwon Yo Sun, and this has been translated from Korean to English by Janet Hong. I believe it's centered around the murder of this girl, and it's told from multiple perspectives such as her sister, her classmate and other people that knew her. That premise in general sounds like my sort of thing, and when I saw that this was a Korean novel that was originally written in Korean, it made me want to pick this one up even more, because I'm trying to read a lot more translated fiction this year. I'm doing a series on my channel where I read books from countries all around the world. I've been starting out with the countries that I was meant to visit in 2020, but I'm definitely planning on expanding past that when I've covered those 4 countries, and Korea is definitely one of the countries that I would love to read a book from. So I think that when this comes out I will use that to do a whole video for that series on it, and I'm really excited. South Korea is a country that I've always really wanted to visit. Seoul has always really intrigued me, but I've never read anything from there before, so I'm very interested to see what this is like, especially because the blurb says that it delves into areas such as class and identity, which is a topic that interests me in general. So seeing how those themes are represented in this book from a culture that I'm not wholly familiar with is very interesting. The next thing that I added is a book called Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendes. This is described as an intersectional coming-of-age story following 19-year-old Jesse McCarthy as he grapples with his racial and sexual identities against the backdrop of a Jehovah's Witness upbringing and the legacies of the Windrush generation. The thing that drew me to this book is the fact that it's set in the Black Country, which is the name for the area that I'm from in the West Midlands. It's called the Black Country because of the Industrial Revolution. I should know the area's specific role in the Industrial Revolution, seeing as it's where I'm from, but I just know that a lot of industry was around here. I've never really seen that many books or media in general that takes place in this area. As a side note, Peaky Blinders is filmed at the Black Country Museum, so I guess that takes place around here, but I haven't ever seen Peaky Blinders, so I've never really seen anything from my general area. That's the main reason why I wanted to read this, but the topics that it covers do sound really fascinating. I also haven't ever read anything, I don't think, about the Windrush generation, so hopefully this book will allow me to educate myself further on that topic. Next, I added We Can Only Save Ourselves by Alison Wisdom. This one is described as with echoes of the Virgin suicides and the fates will find their way. Alison Wisdom's debut novel is the story of one teenage girl's unlikely indoctrination and the reverberations in the tight-knit community she leaves behind. Again, that little description was enough to make me want to read it. I believe it follows the story of a girl who is very well known in the area that she's from. She's crowned homecoming queen, and then following that, she basically vanishes and follows a stranger to a bungalow, and when she gets there are already 4 other women there. It sounds like a bit of a cult situation. I've really enjoyed watching documentaries on cults in the past. I don't think I've ever read a book about one though. I do have my favourite Manson girl, but I haven't actually read that one yet. But I'm really excited to get to this one. I have actually ordered this one already, so it should be arriving soon. Next, I added The Divines by Ellie Eaton. I love this cover, first of all. I also really liked the last cover as well. Can you tell that I love anything like a pastel-y pink shade? This book centres around a character called Josephine, who's now in her 30s, but during her youth, she went to a boarding school for girls. Apparently, she's sort of moved on from this. She hasn't really thought about it in a very long time, but for whatever reason, she ends up being back where she grew up. And then the blurb says, the visit provokes blurry recollections of those doomed final weeks that rocked the community. Ruminating on the past, Josephine becomes obsessed with her teenage identity and the forgotten girls of her one-time orbit. With each memory that resurfaces, she circles closer to the violent secret at the heart of the school's scandal. But the more Josephine recalls, the further her life unravels, derailing not just her marriage and career, but her entire sense of self. I think I've said many times on my channel before, but I do love books that are set in a boarding school. I really do like seeing how that setting is used in books to explore all sorts of themes relating to the identities of the central characters. But I can't say from memory that I've ever read a book that deals with someone like looking back on their time at a boarding school. The ones that I can remember have always been very much focused on the girls in the school at that current moment when they're teenagers. So I think it will be a really interesting perspective to have someone in their 30s looking back on their teen years. Next, I added A Crooked Tree by Una Manion. I believe this is set in the 1980s and it's told from the perspective of a girl. I'm not sure if it's told looking back or if she's still young. But basically one day this girl was in the car with her mom and her siblings, and her mom basically stops, tells her sister to get out of the car and then leaves her on the roadside. And this girl just watches as they drive away from her sister, leaving her behind. And I think it's then all told from her perspective, but I genuinely don't know what else happens other than that. But it sounds like it's going to be very mysterious and a thriller, so I'm not sure that I want to know too much more. I kind of want to go into it and just see how this story plays out and see what goes down. I'm also looking forward to seeing the 1980s as a backdrop for this story taking place. Again, it's not a time period that I've read too many books from. I hope that it does play into the story and it's not just set there for the sake of it being in the 80s. Next is a book called Infinite Country by Patricia Engel. This book follows a young couple who are from Bogota and they meet, fall in love, have their first child and then decide to move to the States. Apparently they move around a bit in the States and ultimately don't stick to their exit date, so they end up being there undocumented. And ultimately this leads to them being found and the father being deported. From the blurb I gather that the mom then remains in the States with her young children and has to raise these now 3 kids by herself, and the book looks at the strain that that whole situation taking place puts on the family. Apparently the author herself is the daughter of Colombian immigrants and is a dual citizen, so I think it will be a really raw and honest portrayal and look at this topic. Again, it's a topic that I haven't really read that much about before. Next is a book called We Run the Tides by Vendela Vida, and this one is described as an achingly beautiful story of female friendship, betrayal and a mysterious disappearance set in the changing landscape of San Francisco. Teenage Eulaby and her magnetic best friend Maria Fabiola own the streets of Sea Cliff, their foggy oceanside San Francisco neighborhood. They know Sea Cliff's homes and beaches, its hidden corners and eccentric characters, as well as the upscale all-girls school they attend. One day, walking to school with friends, they witness a horrible act. Or do they? Eulaby and Maria Fabiola disagree on what happened, and their rupture is followed by Maria Fabiola's sudden disappearance, a potential kidnapping that shakes the quiet community and threatens to expose unspoken truths. Again, this sounds like it could be a very gripping thriller, and you'll sort of notice a theme with some of the books that I'm mentioning. As I said before, I really enjoy books that have to do with boarding schools, or this one is an all-girls school. I do also enjoy a small town community vibe, especially in books that are thrillers, because there's that sense of you can't really trust anyone and just that sense of like claustrophobia. The next one is a little bit different, but it is As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson, which is book 3 in the Good Girls Guide to Murder series. The first book in this series follows Pip, who's doing a project at school, and for her project she decides to look at a murder case that happened in her town a while ago, because she doesn't really agree with what's happened and she wants to find out the real truth. She ultimately does that, and then there's another book in the series which follows a different mystery, and this one is going to follow a different mystery. I'm actually not sure what the premise of this one is. I think it might be something more personal to her, like there's like an imminent danger to her safety, but I'm not too sure other than that what goes on. If you haven't read this series, I would just highly recommend doing it. I absolutely loved the first 2 books, and I'm very excited for this third one to be coming out later this year. I actually buddy read the second one with Rhiannon from Welsh Reader, and I know we're planning on buddy reading the third one together. I think we might try and do a little read along sort of thing to reread the first 2 in advance of this third one coming out. So if that's something that you'd be interested in us doing, then I would love to know in the comments if you would join in or whatever, I guess, just so we know if there's an interest. And the final book of these 10 most recently added books to my TBR is Swimming in the Dark by Thomas Jadrowski. This one says, set in early 1980s Poland against the violent decline of communism, a tender and passionate story of first love between 2 young men who eventually find themselves on opposite sides of the political divide. As I feel like I say a lot, I'm not a big romance reader. However, I do like it when books with romance sort of explore deeper topics, and I really like that the romance in this book is being used to explore the divide between the 2 characters. I think that political element of the story will be very interesting. Again, this is set in the 80s. I said that I hadn't read anything in the 80s before, and now that's 2 books, although this is 80s Poland as opposed to 80s America, like how the other one was. The fact that it's set in Poland also sort of made it stand out to me among some of the other things that I was looking at when I was browsing through various titles, so I can't wait to see what I think of it when I do get around to reading it. And that is it. Those are the 10 books that I most recently added to my TBR on Storygraph. I hope you enjoyed this video. I actually really enjoy doing this, where I just sit down and do a little recap of the things that I've most recently added, because I feel like not only does it let anyone watching know the sort of books that are on my radar, it also lets me mentally check in with everything that I've added. If you've read any of these books, please let me know in the comments what you thought of them, or if any of them are now on your radar. I would love to know that too. Or feel free to just leave me an emoji to let me know that you've watched the video. Other than that though, that is it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're all keeping safe and staying well, and I will see you again next time. Bye!